Welcome to the Butterfly Tumblr Radio channel. Are you ready to start today's story? Let's get started. Imagine witnessing the woman you love in the arms of another man, the moment your world shatters into pieces. This is not just a story of infidelity, but a heart-stopping journey of betrayal and revenge. I'm David, an ordinary man until the day I uncovered my wife Lisa's secret. Now, I invite you to step into a complex world filled with deception and vengeance, where every choice could lead to salvation or doom. Are you ready? Join me as we peel back the layers of mystery, delve into the dark side of human nature, and follow one man's desperate quest for truth and justice amidst despair. I never imagined betrayal could cut this deep. My world shattered the moment I caught her, my beautiful wife, in the arms of another man. Every promise, every whisper of love, now a cruel joke. Rage consumed me as I watched them, my heart splintering with each deceitful kiss. I couldn't just stand by and let them get away with it. The man she chose over our vows, he had no idea what was coming. This isn't just a story of infidelity, it's a tale of revenge raw and merciless. I am not a victim, I am the reckoning. As I sit at my computer trying to figure out how to tell my story, I know no one will believe it. I didn't believe it either when I first heard about what happened to my dad, but the more I think about it, the more I'm sure it's true. Still, I've struggled with whether to share it, even though I'm sure people will ignore it. I feel it should be written down. I decided that if nothing else, it's a way for my children to learn about their grandfather. I love my dad and still miss him, even after 7 years. It all started 9 years ago, but for this story, I'll begin with my trip to the bank. The bank manager left me waiting in an office while he confirmed a court order with the bank's lawyer. This order declared my dad dead. While I waited, I looked at a note that had come a week ago with a safe deposit key. The note was in my dad's handwriting, but all it had was the bank's name. It was the only word I'd had from my dad in 7 years. The court order would let me get into his safe deposit box, one I never knew he had. I can't believe it's been 7 years since my dad vanished. Some think he was murdered, others say he died in an accident, and his body hasn't been found. Some think he ran off to escape his ex-wife, which is the most ridiculous theory. My dad loved his ex-wife deeply. I can't picture him running away from her, but truthfully, I have no idea what happened. It's like he disappeared from the earth. Let me introduce myself. My name is David Evans, and my father's name was Richard. I'm at the bank today because of two events that happened one day apart. A week and a day ago was the 7th anniversary of my dad's disappearance. This meant my dad's estate could finally be handled legally. The day after that, I got a key and a note from my dad. He had rented a box at a bank 3 counties away, which I had never known about. The reason I didn't go to the bank right away was that I had to get the proper court papers. Now I'm in the manager's office while they check these papers. I'm really curious about what my dad left in that mystery box. I already know my sister and I are the only ones to inherit our dad's estate. It bothers me that my sister Emily is acting as a co-trustee. She betrayed our dad, and now she wants to sell the ranch. I don't even know if she can do that, but it worries me. My lawyer says that if the IRS gets involved, the sale of the ranch will probably be forced, even though this isn't Emily's fault. I'm still mad at her. My sister and I have never gotten along. To her, I was her dumb younger brother. She was 2 years older and treated me as if I were stupid. Emily always made fun of me in front of her friends. When it finally hit me that we wouldn't be friends, I started getting back at her for all her insults. One time, when I was 9, Emily had her friends over for a sleepover. She told them she had seen me naked, and they called me Willie all day. That night, I snuck into Emily's room and sprinkled itching powder on her and her friends' clothes. The next day, they started itching uncontrollably. My mum was furious, but my dad thought it was funny. The girls had to shower and wash their clothes twice, and they were still itching when they went home. You'd think Emily would leave me alone after that, but she didn't. We kept getting back at each other. I learned that girls can be much sneakier than boys. My sister got better at hiding her tricks, sometimes taking me a month to catch on. I'm not a subtle guy. Once, Emily took my pet lizard and put it in our parents' bed. My mom freaked out, and I got punished because I hadn't closed my pet's cage properly. At first, I thought it was my fault, but then I saw my sister smirking. To get back at her, I dropped a cockroach down her back. She screamed and stripped her clothes off in the front yard. I got grounded for a week but felt satisfied every time I saw her after that. I really learned how sneaky women can be from my mom, how she treated my dad at the end of their marriage, which made me wary of women for a long time. It wasn't until I met Lisa that I started to trust a woman again, but even then, my fear of betrayal almost ruined my marriage. I love Lisa with all my heart, despite my fears. I asked her to marry me, and she said yes without any hesitation. But the mistrust that my mother had planted in me started to come between Lisa and me. Finally, Lisa couldn't take it anymore and confronted me. "David, one day we need to talk." My heart raced. I thought this was the moment she would tell me she found someone else and wanted a divorce. I was ready to feel hurt and anger. "What do we need to talk about?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "You are driving me crazy, always checking on me," she said bluntly. "If you can't trust me, then our marriage has no future." Her words hit me hard. I thought I was being so sneaky, but Lisa knew our marriage was on the line. I saw two choices: deny it or admit it and explain. Thank God I chose to tell the truth. "You're right," I said quietly. "I messed up. My mother cheated on my father, lied to him, and left him for his worst enemy. My father is a broken man. Even if he tries to hide it, he is deeply unhappy." "David," Lisa said kindly, "I'm not your mother. I would never cheat on you, but we need to move past your fears. Will you go to counseling with me?" The love I saw in Lisa's eyes began to ease my fears. I agreed to see a therapist named Margaret Hogan, who we knew from the hospital. Lisa arranged everything and went to every session with me. Slowly, Margaret and Lisa helped me face my problems. One visit stands out in my mind. The doctor asked me what my biggest fear was. I told her I was scared Lisa would find someone better than me. I loved her so much that I couldn't bear that thought. "David, honey," Lisa said, kneeling beside me with tears in her eyes, "if I ever lost you, my life would be over. I promise I will never leave you unless you tell me to, but please never do that. I love you with all I have." We hugged and cried for several minutes. After we calmed down, Margaret talked to us for another half hour. From that day, my fears began to fade. My trust isn't perfect, but I trust Lisa as much as one person can trust another. If I had to guess, I would say I trust her 99.9%. Looking back, I realized I never truly trusted my mother. There was always a distance between us. I knew she loved me and my sister, but she loved herself more. My sister Emily was her favorite, but even she was behind my mother in Mom's eyes. The first time I saw my mother's selfishness was when Emily had the lead role in a fourth-grade play. Mom forgot about the play and scheduled a hair appointment for the same time. She and Dad were going to a big event at the hospital, one of the top social events of the year. When Mom found out about the conflict, she chose her hair appointment because her favorite stylist, Charles, was available. She didn't think twice. I saw Emily looking out from behind the curtain, searching for Mom, even though we didn't get along well. I felt sorry for her that day. I saw the hurt in her eyes when she realized Mom wasn't coming. That was one of the few serious arguments I remember between my parents. Mom couldn't understand why anyone was upset. Dad was so mad he didn't talk to her for days. Emily didn't speak to her for a week, but Dad could never stay mad, and Mom took Emily out for lunch and shopping to make up for it. She was buying Emily's love, and Emily fell for it. I kept my distance from my mother, but my father and I had a strong bond, built on love and respect. My father also had a special relationship with Emily. He treated her like a princess, but if she had to choose, she would pick Mom. Everything I know about ranching I learned from my father. I grew to love the ranch through him. I started working there as soon as I could walk. We were very close. The pain of his not being around is still with me, even after 7 years since he disappeared. My mother broke my father's spirit and ruined my relationship with her. I hadn't spoken to her for 2 years before my father went missing, and not since. I didn't invite her to my wedding, and I don't let her see her grandchildren. Lisa and I have 3 boys. I guess it was bound to happen that my mother would betray my father. They came from very different worlds. My father came from a big, loving family. My mom, Caroline Blackley, was the only child of a successful builder named Jonathan Blakely and his wife, Carol, who stayed at home. My grandfather John and his wife, Anne, started the ranch, which is now a big part of my dad's land. John got the 100-acre plot from his parents, who bought it to help a neighbor during the Great Depression, but the land had never been used. The ranch began with just that 100 acres, 10 cows, and 2 horses. My grandfather built their first house alone. They lived in a rundown trailer until the house was ready. Over time, they built up the ranch. By the time my dad took over, it had grown to more than 14,000 acres with over 2,000 cows, 25 horses, and other farm animals. John and Anne had 6 kids, Sam, Karen, Bobby, Kelly, Heather, and my dad. They were a close family and always helped each other. If anyone messed with one of the Evans kids, they had to deal with all 6. As the years went by, all the kids got married and moved away, except for Heather and my dad. Heather was killed by a drunk driver when she was only 17. Even years later, my dad would still cry when he talked about his sister because they were very close. My dad loved ranching and wanted to make it his career. This made both my grandparents very happy. My grandfather died of a heart attack a little over a year after my dad finished high school. My dad was still in college, but he started running the ranch and learning about other family businesses from my grandmother. She died almost 10 years after my dad got married. My grandfather was an amazing man. Besides the ranch, he built a feed store on another piece of land. He also became half owner of the local drugstore. Over the years, he got into other businesses, but those don't really matter to this story. To me, my dad was my hero. He wasn't a celebrity or rich or famous. He was just always there for me, always knowing what to do. I loved him as much as any boy could love his father. However, I didn't start to hate my mom until she cheated on my dad and left him. Although my dad wasn't a celebrity, he was known for being good at sports. He wasn't good enough to be a professional athlete but was still very good. He was the starting quarterback for Clifton High School's football team for 3 years. I think this led to his problems in marriage later on. Clifton High's team was made of local ranch and farm boys. They were known for being tough. Everything changed when my dad became the quarterback. He was 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighed 180 pounds. He didn't have a strong arm, but he was quick and smart. He practiced a lot with his receivers during the summer, so by the time football practice started, they were really good together. In professional football, quarterbacks need a strong arm to be smart, tough, tall, and accurate. My dad didn't have all that but was perfect for high school football. He threw the ball before the receiver made his move, which was something professional quarterbacks do, and he did it well. However, he was too short, and his arm was too weak for pro football. The 2 best football teams in our county were Clifton High and Chester Academy. They didn't play each other during the regular season because they were in different groups, but they almost always met in the playoffs. Clifton was a regular school, while Chester was a prep school for rich kids from 5 counties. Clifton's team was mostly kids whose parents farmed or ranched, although other kids joined too. Chester, on the other hand, recruited players from the 5 surrounding counties and probably even farther if they wanted a kid to play for them. The father would suddenly get a job nearby, and the family would move there, like how Tucker Morris joined Chester. Tucker, or Tuck as people called him, was a great player for a high school 300 miles away. He led his team to the playoffs for the first time in 10 years, playing both offense and defense. He was the quarterback and the starting center linebacker, which was rare. That's why Chester wanted him. As usual, Tuck's father got a job as a vice president at a local bank, and the rivalry between Tucker Morris and my father began. The actual rivalry, or should I say the hatred between the two, started toward the end of the summer before they would face each other on the football field. Their first confrontation came one night when my father and some of his friends decided to get something to eat at Rose's Burger and Dog, a local hangout for high school students. This particular night, some of the Chester football players had taken Tuck to Rose's. It was clear that the Chester students had been drinking and were being loud and obnoxious. Tuck was always an arrogant jerk, and he thought he could do whatever he wanted, which described the Chester students in general. They thought they were better than everyone else. Anyway, Tuck was acting like a total fool. He was going from table to table, taking fries off someone else's plate, drinking from another's Coke, grabbing someone's hat, and throwing it across the room. My father probably wouldn't have done anything because Tuck was just making a fool out of himself, but then Tuck decided to bother Becky, Becky was on a date with Simon Ballard. Simon wasn't a football player, but he was a friend of my father's. Simon liked Becky a lot, and she liked him too. Years later, after they graduated from college, they would get married and have 4 children, but tonight Tuck decided he was going to mess with Becky. Tuck was big for a quarterback. He was 6 feet 3 inches and 200 pounds. He had a strong arm. Tuck was fast, but my father questioned his toughness as a quarterback. He had rarely been hit, and as a linebacker, Tuck was hitting running backs much smaller than him. My father also questioned Tuck's smarts, but my father admitted Tuck was probably smart enough on the football field. He was on track for a scholarship to a Division I college to play football, and there was a good chance that he would make it to the pros. Simon, on the other hand, was maybe 5 feet 7 inches and 140 pounds. Becky was a charming girl and very smart. Both Simon and Becky would get full academic scholarships to college. While Becky was not stunningly beautiful, she did have one noticeable trait: she had big breasts. As Tuck was making his way around the room, he finally stopped at Simon and Becky's table. He stood there, staring at Becky, and then reached in with both his hands and touched Becky's breasts. She screamed, and Simon jumped up to defend her. There was no contest. Tuck put Simon on the floor with one punch. That was all my father needed to see. He was out of his seat before anyone knew it and slammed into Tuck. They both tumbled to the floor, and my father got 2 hard punches in on Tuck's face before the two were pulled apart. Needless to say, Tuck did not take well to his face being messed up, and thus the feud between them started. It only got worse before school started. Tuck felt my father had taken an unfair advantage, so in typical Tuck fashion, 3 days later he challenged my father to a fight. Never one to back down, my father accepted and agreed to meet under the Highway 1 bridge. Word spread quickly and quietly amongst the students, and at the appointed time, at least 200 kids gathered to watch the fight. Nobody thought my father stood a chance. Tuck was so much bigger, and he had a reputation as a brawler. The thing about Tuck was that he was a bully. He was so much bigger than most kids his age that he wasn't used to someone standing up to him. The fact that my father had infuriated him, and he told all his friends that he was going to pound my father into the ground. Clearly, Tuck had no idea what my father was made of. They circled each other as the crowd buzzed with excitement. They all expected blood to flow. However, there wasn't any blood. Tuck tried to overpower my father and kept throwing haymakers, none of which landed. My father kept moving in and out, so Tuck tried throwing harder punches. However, the more punches he threw, the more tired he became. My father just continued to dodge and weave, throwing a jab every so often. My father explained that in a fight, patience is a crucial virtue. My dad waited for just the right moment and then he stepped in when Tuck was off balance. He drove his right fist into Tuck's stomach as hard as he could. The blow forced all the air out of Tuck's lungs, and Tuck collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The fight was over. However, the hatred between the two had grown dramatically. Sometime during my father's sophomore year, he had discovered the girl of his dreams and my future mom, Caroline Blackley. At the time, Caroline's father was a small but growing developer in the area. She had just transferred to the school at the beginning of my father's freshman year, However, they didn't meet until their sophomore year. Of course, my future mom was drawn to my dad because he was a star athlete and one of the most popular kids in school. That football season, both Clifton and Chester went unbeaten in the regular season. They met in the regional finals where Chester won 31-24. Tuck passed for 394 yards because Clifton lost. No one noticed that my father had thrown for 414 yards. No one seemed to say much either about the fact that Chester lost its next game and was eliminated from any chance of a state championship. My father liked Caroline a lot, and my future mother seemed taken with my father, or at least she appeared to be. Then they started dating, only each other. But when Clifton lost in the regional finals, somehow Caroline met and started dating Tuck. The fact that Caroline broke up with my father for Tuck was a tough pill for my dad to swallow. After that, my father's dislike for Tuck grew a lot. What my dad didn't get was that his future wife was really selfish. Funny enough, even after all my mother did to him, I'm not sure he would agree with this view of her. But to be fair, most people didn't see this side of Caroline either. When I was young, I didn't understand why we weren't close. As I grew older, I watched and learned. My mother was very smart in how she dealt with people. She made others think she cared about them, but she always found a way to bring attention back to herself. She was so good at it that people didn't notice. My mother cared a lot about social status. I used to think she just loved my dad, but many years later, I realized she did care for him, but she loved herself more. It helped that my dad was a respected and wealthy man who mingled with important people. That part about my dad was true, though. He didn't like the social stuff as much, still he went along with it for my mom. He liked events that helped the community, like the blue and white ball. Caroline was a beautiful girl and woman. She had that sweet look with a charm that made men do anything for her. While married to my dad, there were rumors of her having affairs. I never knew for sure, and my dad never talked about it, but if I had to guess, I'd say there was some truth. I had seen how she could charm my dad to get what she wanted, and I believed she would use this on other men if needed. If my mom had affairs, it was always to benefit herself. She showed this in high school. Even though my dad and Caroline were dating, she found someone she thought was better, Tuck. This moved her up in social rank, so she dumped my dad for her new love. The breakup hurt my dad, but he got over it after the breakup. My dad focused on his work at the ranch, and the next football season left little time for him to think about his ex-girlfriend. During the next football season, fans of Chester and Clifton expected great things. Both schools went undefeated in their regular games. As the playoffs went, they met in the divisional finals. Chester won 27-24. Tuck threw for 432 yards and won the game with a last-minute touchdown pass. No one seemed to remember that a defender slipped during that play, nor did they recall that my dad threw for 404 yards and led his team from their 2-yard line to a touchdown, putting Clifton ahead 24-20 with less than 4 minutes left. Again, no one seemed to remember that with a minute and 17 seconds left, my dad drove his team to Chester's 11-yard line. On the last play, he threw a perfect pass to his receiver at the 2-yard line, but the receiver dropped the ball. The debate about whether the receiver could have scored has gone on for years. When the ball hit his hands, 2 defenders were just inside the goal line. I think he would have scored, but I might be biased. Caroline still went to Clifton, so my dad saw her almost every day at school after the breakup shock. He started dating other girls but never found someone he felt as deeply about as Caroline. He decided Caroline had the right to choose who she wanted to be with, so he stayed friends with her, still. My dad's dislike for Tuck grew. My father's senior year was his best at Clifton. He was voted captain of the football team and president of the student council. At the Halloween dance, my dad and future mom were king and queen. According to my dad, it really bothered Tuck to see them dance that first dance, and of course, during that dance, my dad held Caroline close, and she didn't pull away. The senior year football season was the highlight of my dad's sports career, but it also led to his biggest heartbreak later on. I've thought about that year and wished for my dad that things had gone differently. That season went as Clifton fans hoped. Clifton went undefeated again. Chester, winning every game by at least 30 points. The playoff schedule changed once more, setting up Chester and Clifton to face each other for the state championship. Chester was so strong that year, partly because the coach decided to have Tuck play every down on both offense and defense. You have to give Tuck credit for this. It must have been very tiring. My dad always said Tuck was a great athlete, but he also said Tuck was a really bad person. The state championship game was a big deal. The game would be in a large stadium near the Capitol and shown on TV all over the state. By then, Tuck had over 20 scholarship offers. All the top football colleges wanted him, but he hadn't chosen one yet. Some said he was waiting to see where Caroline would go to college. I doubt that, but people love a good romance. From what I heard, Tuck only cared about himself, except when it came to Caroline, but even then, I think he would have picked the best college that offered him a scholarship. He probably thought Caroline would just wait for him. He loved my mom a lot. He was a sports hero. His parents were in all the right clubs, and it seemed like he was going places. Of all the games my dad played in high school, his best was this championship game. It was the game where the hatred between my dad and Tuck became permanent. The first half of the game was all about offense. Both Tuck and my dad threw the ball for a combined 680 yards. There was almost no running game for our team. This was because of the strong farm boys on defense. For Tuck's team, it was because of Tuck's great work as a middle linebacker. By the end of the third quarter, the college coaches must have been thrilled at the thought of Tuck joining their teams. Despite everything, my dad always said Tuck was the best natural athlete he had ever seen. During the first 3 quarters, Tuck hit my dad hard every chance he got. This was before rules were made to protect quarterbacks, so every time Tuck blitzed, he would slam my dad into the ground. But my dad would always get back up and smile at Tuck. The smile started to get on Tuck's nerves, so he began hitting my dad late. Most of those late hits didn't get penalties, but one of them did, and it cost Tuck's team. It was 4th and goal at the 3-yard line, and my dad's team decided to go for it. The score was tied at 31-31. The coach called for a short pass, but Tuck's team covered it well, so my dad had to run. He found Randy Thompson in the end zone. Just as my dad threw the ball, Tuck hit him hard. My dad saw stars from that hit and got up slowly. A flag was thrown for unnecessary roughness on Tuck, making my dad happy since his pass had been too high, anyway. At the 1-yard line, the coach called 3 running plays. Tuck stopped them each time, and we only gained half a yard. The third quarter ended without knowing if our coach would go for it or not. When the fourth quarter started, it was clear we were going for it again. Another slant pass was called, but it was covered. My dad had to run, and Tuck chased him. I've watched this play 100 times. Tuck was getting closer to my dad, and it seemed like he would catch him. But my dad turned and ducked. Tuck's knee hit my dad's helmet hard, and he went down. Somehow, my dad stayed up and ran into the end zone. No one knew it then, but Tuck's knee hit my dad's helmet and hurt him badly. Tuck missed 2 plays but came back into the game. It was clear he wasn't moving as well after that last touchdown. Both defenses played better, and the only other score was a field goal by Tuck's team with 9 minutes left. Neither team could relax when my dad's team got the ball back. He threw short passes against Tuck's team, but one of his passes got tipped at the line and went right to Tuck. Tuck ran down the field with the ball, and it looked like he would score. But my dad chased him. An uninjured Tuck might have made it, but slowed by his bad knee, he got caught. My dad tackled Tuck hard at the 20-yard line. My dad not only stopped Tuck but also caused him to fumble. Tuck's ankle got broken, and my dad's team got the ball. From that point on, the game wasn't close. My dad's team scored again, and the final score was 45-31. It was the first and only state championship for our team. After Tuck was no longer useful, his dad lost his job. Right after graduation, to avoid suspicion, of course, people noticed, but nothing was done. Tuck's dad moved west and found a job in California. Most colleges that wanted Tuck lost interest. Only Northwestern gave him a chance, He had to start as a walk-on. If he made the team, he would get a full scholarship. Tuck tried to fix his knee and ankle, but he never got back to his old self. He didn't make the team at Northwestern. My dad lost touch with Tuck around then. Besides, Caroline came back into his life. Caroline had broken up with Tuck a month after the big game. She was tired of his bad mood and that he couldn't do much because he was hurt. It was a month or two later when my dad and Caroline met again. They started dating while he was finishing his 2-year college course in animal care. Caroline went to the state university but quit after 1 year. She had always been important in her small town, but at the university, she was just another student. Anyway, my mom and dad got married a month after he graduated. Caroline got pregnant soon after with my sister. I was born 2 years later. From what I've heard, my dad was really happy for the first 14 years with my mom. Mom's feelings about the marriage were a mystery, though. She could be warm one day and cold the next. She always put herself first. What kept things calm was that my dad did almost everything she wanted, but he stayed firm when she went too far. Then Tuck returned to town. Tuck's dad had moved to California at first. He found a job with another bank, then became a stockbroker. He did really well and started his own company. He learned a lot and made contacts, so he started buying banks in our state. When Tuck came back, he worked for his dad. Tuck was made a top boss and managed the banks his dad owned in the southern part of the state, which were 9 banks. For the first 18 months, nothing changed. But my mom would always notice when Tuck's picture was in the newspaper. Tuck, I later found out, really wanted to see my mom again, but at first, he was busy working long days. Once he had some free time, Tuck went after my mom quickly. My dad, trusting as he was, didn't mind when Tuck asked my mom to help plan a big event. I later learned my mom started seeing Tuck after the first week. They kept it secret because Tuck was also married with 2 kids. My dad trusted people, but he started to suspect something. So with a heavy heart, he hired a private eye. It didn't take long to find proof. You might think people would turn against Tuck and my mom, but they didn't much. They felt bad for my dad, but still hung out with Caroline and Tuck when my dad showed the proof to Tuck's wife. She divorced him. I guess it cost Tuck a lot, but I don't know the exact details because the case was kept secret. Tuck's wife took their kids and moved away. Tuck had little to do with his children after that. He was very selfish. What I remember most clearly from that time was the talk my dad had with my mom. I can't forget it and almost remember everything said word for word. My mom picked us up from school, and when we got home, Dad was sitting at the dining table. He looked at us and said, "Kids, go on upstairs. I need to talk to your mother." Emily quickly ran up to her room. I pretended to go upstairs but I sneaked back down and hid at the bottom of the stairs. Dad threw some pictures in front of my mom. "How could you do it, Caroline? Does our marriage mean nothing to you?" Mom looked at the pictures. "I'm sorry you found out this way. Tuck wanted to wait until he could settle with his wife before I talked to you, but it seems that's not happening. To answer your question, I guess our marriage did mean something, but it's over now. It's time for both of us to move on. You've always known I love Tuck," she continued. "Then why did you marry me?" Dad's voice was calm, but I could see the pain in his eyes from where I was hiding. "I did love you, but I love Tuck more. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said. My dad sighed and shook his head. The hurt in his eyes lit a fire in me. If you had asked me before if I loved my mom, I would have said yes, and I did. But at that moment, whatever love I had for her died. "Fine, I guess we should talk about the details of your divorce," Dad said with a distant voice. I was shocked by how calm he was. "What is it you want?" he asked. Mom gave Dad a look like he should already know. "I want half. This is a no-fault state, and I'm entitled to half of everything, including the ranch." Dad did something that totally surprised me. He chuckled. "That's not going to happen, Caroline," he said calmly. You must have gotten your legal advice from I looked it up online. Mom hissed, I'm entitled to half of everything. Oh, you're right, Dad smiled. This is a no-fault state, and you're right. You should get half of what I have. But here's the thing, you didn't find out that I don't own anything. The ranch, the equipment, the businesses, all the money, it's in a trust. I just get a salary and a share of the profits if there are any. My mom's face turned hard, then she smiled in a mean way. Fine, the lawyers can deal with it. Besides, Tuck has enough money to take care of me without your help. I'll just take the kids and leave. I had been hiding all this time, but I got really angry seeing my mother treat my father this way. When she said she'd take my sister and me, I lost it. I ran out of my hiding place. You witch! I shouted at my mother as I charged into the room. David, don't talk to your mother like that, my father said, looking completely surprised. Neither of them knew I had been listening to everything. Dad, I've always done what you told me. I said, my voice shaking, but today I'm going to speak up whether you like it or not. My father was silent as I turned to my mother. That's when I saw the pictures of her with Tuck. I was disgusted. I called you a witch, I said, lowering my voice and pointing at the pictures, and I'm sorry. You're worse than that. What's that gross stuff on your leg? My mother flinched like she'd been slapped. She looked at the pictures and back at me. She seemed embarrassed and she even started to cry. She finally managed to speak again. David, honey, you need to go upstairs and let your father and me finish our talk. This has nothing to do with you. I don't take orders from someone like you, I said, still very angry. My mother's tough front began to break. Looking back, I realized that she must have loved me at some level, but by then, I didn't care. Mother, I have no respect for you, I shouted. I hate the sight of you, and the sooner you're gone, the better. I will never live with you in that jerk Tuck. From today on, you're dead to me. David, you don't mean that, my father said, placing his hand on my shoulder. I told you I don't have a mother, I said, still full of anger. She died today. I pulled away from my father and started to leave the room. Then I stopped and turned around. I am never going to talk to you again, and I don't ever want you to talk to me. We're done. I stormed out of the room and up the stairs, but as I went, I could hear my mother crying. I glanced back and saw my father trying to comfort her. I'm sure he doesn't mean it, my father said, trying to calm her down. I'll talk to him tomorrow after he cools off. The next morning, my father tried to talk to me, but I wasn't interested. I meant what I said. In my mind, my mother was never there for me, so it wasn't a loss. And all these years later, I still haven't talked to her. The divorce went through, and my father was right, my mother didn't get much, but my father was very bitter. He fought her for every little thing. When the lawyer bills got too high, my mother gave up. That was one of the few happy days for my father. My sister Emily chose to live with my mother, and I stayed at the ranch. At first, my father wasn't upset that Emily chose our mother, he sort of expected it. But when Emily spoke against him in court, everything changed. After that day, my father never talked to Emily or about her again. I don't think Emily was happy living with our mother. She never said anything bad, but I knew she was sad that Dad cut her off. The few times we talked, Emily asked me to get Dad to call her. He never did. Both Emily and my dad were hurting, but I couldn't help them. This was more fallout from my mother's actions. When Emily graduated from college, our dad had disappeared. She stayed back east and got married. I wasn't invited to either event. I didn't understand why, and it made me mad. I stopped talking to Emily after that. Now we're fighting over the ranch, and I'm worried she'll win. She wants to sell everything, and I don't. It's really complicated with the trust, no will, my uncles and aunts, and my father missing. I've been running everything since he disappeared. About a week after I took over, I found out that my father's siblings had given him half of their shares long ago. They felt he deserved it since he did all the work. My dad owned most of our property now that he's been declared dead. The lawyers told me and my sister that in order to keep the ranch, we have to come up with a lot of money to pay the taxes. My sister wants to sell everything because she and her husband don't have the money for the taxes and don't want to borrow money to try and save the ranch. What surprised me about my dad's estate was that he didn't leave any clear instructions. This was shocking because he always planned everything carefully. So when I found out there was no will, I was really surprised. Now the state would decide what happens to everything. It was a big mess. After the divorce, Tuck and my ex-mom got married within a month. Tuck, being the kind of person he is, bought a big piece of land right across from our ranch and built a huge house on it. He did this so my dad would see it every time he left the front gate. After the divorce, my dad focused only on his work. While I still lived with him, he would sit on the front porch for hours, just staring into space. His heart was broken, and he was very sad. He was also full of anger towards Tuck. The worst part was that Tuck kept trying to upset my dad. Tuck hated my dad, and taking his wife was the biggest win for him. Don't get me wrong, Tuck really loved Caroline, but beating my dad made it even better for him. Whether or not my ex-mom felt the same about Tuck, I doubted it. Tuck's actions hurt my dad so much that he started going to town less and skipped social events, but Tuck didn't stop. My dad was still very involved with the Cattlemen's Association. He had been the chairman for 2 years and was in his third and last term, as you could only serve for 3 years in a row. During this third year, Tuck joined the association and quickly got elected to the board. So my dad had to deal with him at every meeting. Tuck always brought Caroline to the meetings. She didn't stay, but Tuck made sure my dad saw him kiss her before she left. My ex-mom seemed to enjoy hurting my dad. Tuck and my mom were married for about 1.5 years when things got really crazy. I didn't understand why my dad was behaving the way he was. I also couldn't understand my ex-mom's actions. It was like the world had turned upside down. Nothing made sense anymore. Mr. Evans, a voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up and saw the bank manager standing next to me. We verified the court order. I can take you to your father's safe deposit box now. Would you like a private room to see what's inside? Yes, please, I said as I stood up. The manager led me into the vault where we got the box, and then into a private room. The room was small, but it had a counter and a chair. Once the door closed, I locked it and placed the box down. I opened it and found 2 large envelopes and 1 smaller one on top. I opened the smaller envelope first and found a handwritten letter from my dad. I knew his handwriting right away. Dear David, I'm so sorry to have left without a word. There was nothing I could do about that. Time was short, and you were out of town. Besides, I felt it was better you didn't know because I'm sure you would have tried to stop me. I chose to leave on my own, and I will not come back. The other envelopes in this box contain the full story of what happened to me and my last will and testament. The will is notarized, and there's a business card for the law firm that prepared it. When you read my story, you might think I've lost my mind, but believe me, it's all true. When you read this, know that I'm alive, but please don't tell anyone where I've gone. No one will find me. After you read my story, you'll understand why. In my story, I've asked you to do a few things for me. I know they will be hard, but I'm begging you to complete my requests. I can't truly atone for what I've done, but if you agree to do what I ask, I believe it will help relieve the harm I've caused. I'm deeply ashamed of my actions. Don't worry about me. I am content and happy about where I'm going. My only regret is that I won't see you or your sister again. I tried to be a good father, but I know I failed miserably. I want you to know that I was always proud of you and loved you as much as any father could love his son. I also loved your sister with all my heart, despite everything. Even if you don't believe my story, please do the small favors I've asked. That would mean so much to me. I have caused so much pain. I love you beyond words, Dad. I dropped my dad's note on the counter and sat back in my chair, shocked. My dad was still alive. Where could he have gone? In today's world, no one can hide forever. But I had already spent a lot of money on private investigators trying to find him with no luck. I was puzzled and troubled by my dad's apology. What had he done that he was so sorry for? I thought back over the 2 years before my dad vanished, and I couldn't find any reason to blame him, even with all the crazy stuff that happened. I felt so many emotions. The biggest one was joy that my dad was still alive. At that moment, I just knew we could find him. I decided to hire the best private detectives I could afford this time. I felt they had a real chance to find him. It bothered me that my dad felt he had done something terrible. I thought hard about everything, especially the last 6 months before he disappeared. Still, I couldn't think of anything he did that was so wrong. I quickly looked inside the big envelopes and pulled out his story, Richard's story. David, if you're reading this, it means I've been gone for 7 years. As I said in my note, please don't tell anyone I'm alive. Explaining where I went would be nearly impossible. I know this story will be hard to believe, but everything in it is true. It may also seem strange how it's written, but I'll explain why. You already know the story between your mom, Tuck, and me, so I won't go into that. When your mom left me for Tuck, I was heartbroken. Losing her to anyone would have been horrible, but losing her to someone I hated more than anyone else drove me to the brink of madness. I went to a very dark place. I wanted revenge on both of them and wanted to hurt them worse than they hurt me. That hate changed me in ways I didn't even realize. In the end, it made me do things I regret deeply. For that, I beg you to forgive me. This is my first request. If, after reading, you can't forgive me, I will understand. I still love you more than anything, and hope you still love me a bit, even though I take full responsibility for my actions. Caroline and Tuck are not innocent, they betrayed me and hurt me on purpose. Tuck kept mocking my loss, and she supported him all the way. She seemed to enjoy it as much as he did, maybe because of the divorce settlement. I don't know, and I don't care anymore. I admit our divorce fight was not my best moment. I should have given Caroline the money she was entitled to, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I was filled with hate for both of them. Yet, I was still in love with your mom. I wanted revenge, but what I got was much more than I expected. My reason for leaving started about 6 months before I finally left. It was the night of that big storm that knocked out the power for about 6 hours all over town. If you remember, I sent you home to your new wife shortly after the rain started, and the power went out. Tornado warnings were issued, and I knew your wife would be scared. That night, your rented house got flooded because of leaks in the roof. With no power, I got out the lanterns and flashlights. Then I poured myself a scotch and settled into my recliner. It was around midnight, and I was still up, sipping on my 5th drink. Yes, I drank too much back then, but once the sun set, it was the only thing that gave me peace. As I sat there, listening to jazz on my battery-powered radio, almost dozing off, I felt the house shake. At first, I thought it was an earthquake, but it only lasted for a second or two. Whatever it was, I decided to ignore it and go back to dozing. About an hour later, I thought I should go to bed because I wanted to wake up early for work. As usual, I was heading for the stairs when I heard something on the front porch. The wind was still blowing hard, so I thought something might have fallen over. To my surprise, I found a woman lying next to the front door. She was cut and bleeding, barely conscious. I guess the alcohol had dulled my senses because I didn't really notice her clothes. She seemed to be wearing an aqua jumpsuit, but I focused on her wounds. She was pretty banged up, which is why I didn't pay much attention to her appearance. She had a lump on her forehead the size of a golf ball. In the dim light, her skin seemed bronze, and her hair looked gray, yet she seemed young. I helped her into the guest bedroom and checked her wounds. Some looked serious. I told her that the cuts needed cleaning and bandaging. I showed her what I intended to do. While I explained, she said in a strange accent, "I meant." I didn't recognize the language, but I didn't think she could take care of the cuts by herself, if that's what she meant. She could barely move. I checked her wounds again and saw that the ones on her back were minor. It was the ones on her legs and stomach that seemed bad. Still, it made no sense for her to try and bandage herself. I don't think so, I replied with frustration. You can barely move. I'll do it. No, I mend, she shook her head. You can't do it, I said, pointing to her bleeding cuts and raised my hands, shrugging to show I was confused by her refusal. Need tool, she said, almost begging. What tool? I asked, very puzzled. She pointed out the window at the front of the house. Tool there, you want me to go out there? I pointed to the same window. You want me to go out in the rain? I won't find anything in the dark, I complained. But she reached into her pocket and pulled out something shaped like a small mirror. This tool helps, she said, handing it to me. I took it and saw it had a red light moving from the center to the edge. The lights were pointing toward the front window. It seemed like some kind of GPS, but I had never seen one like this before. Please find tool, she pleaded. Blue, find blue. She started to lose consciousness, but the look in her eyes was clear. Despite her wishes, I decided to call for an ambulance, but my cell phone had no service. I later learned that the storm had damaged several cell towers. The landline was also dead. I thought about driving her to the hospital, but then I wondered if there were others hurt out there. She didn't seem to be in immediate danger, so I covered her worst wounds with towels to stop the bleeding and wrapped a blanket around her. Taking her device, I went outside. The wind was calming down, and the rain had turned to a drizzle. I followed the device's guidance. It led me down the driveway, out the front gate, and to the main road. I turned left and drove for a short time before spotting something smoldering off the road. Without the GPS, I would have missed it. At first, I thought maybe a small plane had crashed, but the debris field was too small, so it had to be a car crash. As I got closer, it didn't seem like there were flames. It was more like the wreckage was glowing red. I had drunk a few too many drinks and wasn't thinking clearly when I got out of the truck. The fires started to fade. There was still some wreckage, and it looked like a small car, maybe a sports car, but I wasn't there to inspect it. I was looking for survivors and the blue tool. I quickly searched for any other victims from the car's size. I didn't expect more than one other person. After a quick search, I found no one else. I then focused on finding the tool. It only took a minute to spot the first blue object. It seemed to glow, but the light faded when I touched it. It was about the size and shape of a baseball. Then I found another blue object shaped like a thick book nearby. I found another one, the size of a small paperback book. I found a fourth one looking like a laptop, and the fifth object was as small as a golf ball. The blue light on each one faded when I picked them up. I gathered all 5 and headed back to the house. When I returned to the bedroom, the woman was awake but looked weaker. The towels were soaked with blood. I showed her the 5 objects I had found. This is what I found, but I think I should take you to the hospital. No, she said weakly, almost panicking. She pointed to the small golf ball-sized object, and I handed it to her. She twisted it a few times, and it flashed green once. Then she brought it to her mouth and swallowed the liquid coming out of a small opening. After a few minutes, her wounds stopped bleeding. She rubbed some of the yellow liquid on her cuts, and they started to close. In 5 minutes, she looked much better, and the bump on her head went down. I didn't know what to do next, but at least she wasn't bleeding anymore. Thank you, she said, bowing slightly from her sitting position. Then she added tiredly, must rest. I nodded and adjusted the blankets to make her comfortable. She smiled and fell asleep quickly. I closed the door and slept on the couch in case she needed me. Despite getting little sleep, I was up by 5 o'clock. I checked on her, and she was still asleep. I started my day about half an hour later. I got a call from you, David, a leak in the roof of your rental house had flooded the living room and one bedroom. I told you not to come in and to handle the damage. I asked if you needed help, but you said you were fine, so I went about my work. I checked on her every hour, she was still asleep. When I came back to make lunch, I found her sitting in the den, flipping through TV channels. She wasn't wearing her jumpsuit anymore. She had found one of the dresses my wife Caroline had left behind. They were both about the same height, and I had to admit my unexpected guest looked pretty good in the clothes. She wasn't as stunning as Caroline, but still quite attractive. Her hair, which seemed silver the night before, was just blonde today. The strange bronze tone of her skin was now a deep tan. It's amazing what 5 drinks will do to your perception. But then the most surprising thing happened. My guest turned around quickly when she noticed me there and smiled. You look much better today, I said with a smile, thinking she might not understand my words. Yes, I am, she answered, thank you for looking after me last night. I was in pretty bad shape. You can talk, I said, shocked. Last night you could hardly say a few words. I wasn't sure how much you understood. I think the blow to my head caused that, she said gently, touching her forehead. My name is Richard Evans, I said, holding out my hand. I'm Leandra Forth, she replied, reaching out her hand. Her hand was warm, but a small shock passed between us. Leandra must have felt it too because she pulled her hand back quickly, but her smile grew wider. Sorry, I said, must be static electricity. I was about to make some lunch, I said, pointing to the kitchen, would you like something to eat? She smiled and nodded. I have to say, her presence made me feel happy for the first time in a year and a half. I didn't realize how much I missed having someone around, even if it was just for today. So, what happened to you? I asked as we sat at the kitchen table, eating our sandwiches and fruit. I was driving to New York when I must have hit some water on the road, Leandra explained slowly. I lost control, my car flipped over several times, but I managed to get out. I crawled away, and then my car exploded. I don't think there's much left of it now, she added, just a burned-out shell. No, there's just a burned-out shell now, I confirmed. I confirmed what was with all those blue things. I asked. You were almost frantic about them, you insisted I go find them, and you didn't want me to call a doctor or an ambulance. Then you healed yourself. How did you do that? I'm sorry, Leandra said, I wasn't thinking clearly last night. It was very kind of you to look for my things, they aren't really special, but they were given to me by my boss. They were made especially for me. As for healing myself, I just took some antibiotics and put some on my cuts. As you can see, the wounds have formed scabs. Leandra held out her arm where I could see several scabbed over wounds, then she showed one of her legs, and I saw the same scabbing. Last night those wounds looked much worse, but then again, I had been drinking quite a lot. I wasn't hurt that badly, she continued. It looked worse than it was. I was very lucky. I think the blow to my head was the worst injury. When we finished eating, I'll show you what I made you go out in the storm to get, I said. I'm really sorry because they're not that special. The first item she showed me was the GPS I had used the night before. You already know about this one, she said with a grin. I always forget where I park my car. With this, I never have to worry about finding it. The book-sized blue item was a box of makeup, or so it seemed to me. The smaller blue item turned out to be a smartphone. The baseball-shaped item was a container for small candies. Leandra offered me one, and I took it. I couldn't quite place the taste, but it was sweet and delicious. It must have been full of sugar because I suddenly felt a burst of energy. Leandra explained more about the medicine she had taken the night before. It was new and developed by the company I work for. The medicine was in clinical trials, and I was the lead chemist on the team that created it. The ball with the medicine was a new delivery system. Inside the ball was coiled tubing, and when activated, it would push the liquid out. I offered to have what was left of her car towed away, but she said her insurance company wanted to look at it first. Leandra said she had already called them, and they promised to send someone. If you can suggest a good hotel or motel, Leandra said, sitting down tiredly, I can leave you in peace. Aside from enjoying her company, Leandra still looked very weak, so I offered to let her stay. Look, you don't seem fully recovered, I said cautiously. You're more than welcome to stay here until you get your strength back. You'll have your own room and bathroom. It's no trouble, as I'm mostly out working, you'd have the house to yourself. That would be a terrible imposition, she said. I can rest in a hotel until I'm well enough to head to New York, but I would like to take you to dinner as a thank you, and maybe you could show me around the area. Nonsense, I said, waving my hand with a smile. I won't hear of it. Until you're well enough to go out, you'll stay here. I'm not a bad cook, and besides, it will be nice to have some company. Leandra smiled at me and agreed to stay. I have to admit, for the first time in a long while, I felt less lonely and angry. But it didn't take long before Leandra sensed my deep sadness. It would have been obvious to anyone how lonely and filled with hate I was. Little by little, she got me to tell her my story. I ended by saying that even after everything Caroline put me through, I still loved her and would take her back right away. Leandra looked at me curiously. Love, Leandra said with a sigh, it's mostly about chemicals. It's a reaction in the brain and body. If you get the right balance of chemicals, you can make someone fall in love with you. I must have looked confused because Leandra blushed. It's just a theory, she said quickly. I've been researching it at work and think it has potential, but saying love is mostly about chemicals. I must have put too much faith in my early data, she continued. I've been working on this theory for a while. If you ever figure that out, you'll make a lot of money. The next few days were nice. I knew I'd miss Leandra when she left. I'd returned to thinking about Caroline and feeling angry at her and Tuck. I also knew there was nothing I could do about it. Still, I kept trying to come up with some way to get back at them. 2 days before Leandra was supposed to leave, I had a Cattlemen's Association meeting in town. I told her I'd be back by 5 o'clock in the afternoon and if she wanted, I'd take her out for dinner as a sort of goodbye. I explained I couldn't do it on her last night because I had payroll and meetings. She seemed sad when I mentioned her leaving, but at the time, I thought I'd just imagined that. On the way to town, I got a call saying the air conditioning at the association offices was broken, and the meeting was rescheduled. So I turned around and went back to the ranch. When I got back, I went inside to change into my work clothes. Then I heard a strange low humming noise. I followed the sound to Leandra's room, and her door was open a little. Without thinking, I pushed it open and was shocked by what I saw. Leandra was standing naked in the middle of the room, but what really surprised me was that her appearance was changing. She was holding a blue object I thought was a cell phone. A pale green light came from the device as she moved it over her body. As I watched, her blonde hair turned soft silver, her skin took on a copper tone, and her ears became pointed. A thought hit me, this woman was not from here. Sensing me, Leandra turned and smiled. She approached me, her body trembling slightly. She softly touched my cheek and then kissed me on the lips. The electricity I felt the first time I touched her was much stronger now and very pleasant. Leandra helped me with my clothes and led me to the bed. Her body was elegant and had its own unique beauty. I touched her soft skin and kissed her. The connection between us grew stronger with every touch. Later, as we lay together quietly, I finally looked into her eyes. "Where are you from?" I asked. She laughed, "A long way from here, about 72 light years. My world is called Thalia." "How did you come here, and why?" I was full of questions. I said, amazed. "I'm not supposed to tell you," Leandra said softly, "but I need you to trust me." She nodded, and I agreed, my heart pounding with curiosity and wonder. "I'm on a mission," she continued. "My people are dying." "What do you mean?" I asked, worried. "Our population is shrinking because of our own arrogance," Leandra explained, her voice heavy with sadness. We are much more advanced than the people here. We were controlled by the same strong feelings: jealousy, desire, anger, and greed. We had weapons so powerful we could destroy entire solar systems. I listened, horrified yet fascinated by her story. To survive, we decided to get rid of these bad emotions. We aimed to build societies filled with love and creativity. We thought it worked, but we made a big mistake. Leandra fell silent, tears rolling down her cheeks. She cried into my chest, her body shaking with the weight of her sorrow. We were so proud, she whispered. What happened? I asked, gently stroking her hair. When I told you that love was mostly due to chemicals in our bodies, it wasn't just an idea, Leandra said, her voice barely audible. We proved it. Actually, it's 96.8%. We made a device that could check how well people matched. It let us pair the best matches, but it was hard to find a match for everyone. So we made another device that could check and, if needed, change the chemicals in a person. There were limits, though, she continued. For example, we found out you could only change the chemicals once. If you tried to make the match too high, there were side effects. Leandra paused for a moment, watching my reaction. Seeing that I was ready to hear more, she went on. If two people have at least a 60% match, true love can exist. A higher match just makes the love stronger. So we figured out the love problem. Using the same idea, we made a chemical to reduce the bad emotions. It seemed to work in tests, but when we released it into the air, it had a bad result. In less than a year, almost all the men on my planet couldn't have children. This caused chaos and terrible wars as countries fought for the few men who could still have kids. Over 200 years, the planet went from 6 billion people to barely 100,000. That still doesn't explain why you're here, I said, confused and horrified by what Leandra's world had gone through. We have been searching the universe to find species that share our DNA. Then we look for fertile men we can mate with. We found that people on this planet share our DNA, but only a few men are compatible. About 1 in a million can make one of our women pregnant. I wasn't supposed to be on this mission, but another woman got sick, and I was a last-minute replacement. As I was heading to New York, my pod was hit by lightning, and I crashed here. It was a lucky accident. I found someone who could make me pregnant and someone whose chemical makeup matches mine. I have fallen deeply in love with them. I was shocked by what she said. Are you talking about me? She nodded and kissed me. You have already given me a child, and it will be a boy. You can tell already. We've only been together once. Actually, we were together 6 times, Leandra laughed. But you made me pregnant the first time. The next 5 times were just for fun and because I love you. I sat up against the headboard, with Leandra's head resting on my chest. That first night, you couldn't speak our language, could you? I asked. Leandra chuckled and shook her head. No, as a last-minute replacement, there wasn't enough time to learn it. Luckily, I had a universal translator. That first morning when you found me watching TV, I was using the translator to learn your language. I also learned Spanish. So, what happens now? I asked with a little worry, trying to joke, are you going to take me to your world? No, she looked up at me seriously. Our laws don't allow us to take anyone by force, but you can come with me to my home world. If you come, you would be treated with great respect, and you would have someone who loves you deeply. Would you do that? The idea was tempting, but I finally said, no. My son isn't ready to take over running the ranch yet, plus I am still deeply in love with Caroline. Because of that alone, you wouldn't be happy with me. In my mind, I know I'll never get my ex-wife back, but my heart won't accept that. And as strange as it sounds, I want to get back at her and her husband. Tears fell down Leandra's cheeks, and she sighed sadly. I thought you wouldn't want to go with me. Even if I'm not going, can't you stay a little longer? I asked hopefully. She shook her head. No, my time is short. I wouldn't have stayed this long if I hadn't found out about our match when I checked your chemical makeup. I found that you are 89% compatible with me. I am 98% compatible with you. It's very rare for someone's compatibility to be over 90%. That's why I love you so much. Leandra leaned up and kissed me, then snuggled back down on my chest. I still don't understand why you can't stay longer, I almost pleaded. I have to return to my world tomorrow before our dimensional hole closes. These holes only open sometimes and close after a week. If I don't go back tomorrow, I'll be stuck here for 6 months until the next hole opens, and I can't hide myself that long. But your pod was destroyed, I said. I have a spare, she said, pointing to a blue box the size of a dictionary. After all I'd seen and heard, I didn't doubt that the blue box somehow would take her home. But then she surprised me with a request. But before I go, can I meet this woman who's keeping you from me? I wanted to say no at first, and I wish I had, but I agreed, and everything that happened after that was my fault. I have to live with the results. I thought maybe seeing Caroline and Tuck with Leandra on my arm would make it easier. I even thought it might make Caroline jealous. It didn't work out that way. I knew Caroline and Tuck would be at the country club dance. Caroline loved these events. She could show off her new dress, talk to the men, and still have her husband close by. She had the best of both worlds. Once I decided to go to the dance, I couldn't let Leandra wear one of Caroline's old dresses. Luckily, I had bought a new designer dress for Caroline right before things went bad. It was still in the closet, untouched. The new dress fit Leandra well, and I wore one of my 2 suits. When we walked into the club, people were surprised to see me. They were even more surprised to see a beautiful woman on my arm. It felt good that most of them were happy to see me. I saw Caroline right away. She was with a group of young men, and Tuck was beside her. I used to hate how Caroline always did that, but Tuck didn't seem to mind. He acted like, you can look, but don't touch. Leandra almost dragged me over to where Caroline and Tuck were standing. Caroline looked up in surprise when she saw me, and her eyes got wide when she saw Leandra. Then she noticed the dress. Leandra was wearing a dress Caroline had never seen before and didn't know I had bought. Well, look what the cat dragged in, Caroline said sarcastically. Tuck laughed, and Caroline continued, why are you here tonight? If I remember right, Richard, you hate these events. Finally got brave enough to face us? Tuck asked with a smirk. No, not brave, Tuck, just hungry, I said with a smile. Leandra wanted dinner and some dancing. I paused and gave Tuck and Caroline a smile. Oh, sorry, how rude of me. Leandra, this is my ex-wife, Caroline, and this is her new husband, Tuck. Caroline, Tuck, this is Leandra. Nice to meet you, Leandra, they both said, shaking hands. That's a beautiful dress you're wearing, Caroline said after a pause. Oh, thank you, Leandra said with a laugh. I didn't have anything to wear. I'm here on a business trip and decided to see Richard at the last minute. He gave me this dress. Isn't that sweet of him? What business are you in? One of the other men asked. I'm a senior chemist for Sable Enterprises, Leandra answered. My team is working on a new drug, and we're close to releasing it. I can't say much more, but I'm here to decide on the release date. I watched Caroline's face, and it was clear she felt upstaged. Caroline hated it when someone stole her spotlight. I felt a small, mean pleasure. Caroline, I said, why have you been hiding at the ranch? It's been a year and a half. You can't still be sad about our marriage ending. I thought you would understand that Tuck was always my true love. You've been childish because of you, our kids are divided. You've turned my son against me, but at least Emily is mine. Caroline smiled up at Tuck. I thought you'd be happy I found true love. Leandra could feel me tense up and squeezed my arm again. Then she looked at Tuck and me before turning back to Caroline. I'm sorry, I don't understand, Leandra said with fake confusion. Why would you give up Mike for anyone else? But I guess if you're truly in love, trading down is acceptable. Before anyone could respond, Leandra grabbed my hand. Richard, you promised we would dance. Nice to meet you, you both. The orchestra started playing, and we walked to the dance floor. I'm not a great dancer, but Leandra was great. That was brilliant, I said as I kissed her cheek. She pulled me in close. We stayed for about an hour. We had some food and a few more dances. Sometimes, I saw Tuck or Caroline staring at us with angry eyes. When we got home that night, I wanted to take Leandra to bed right away, but she wanted to have some coffee first. She said she had something to discuss with me at the kitchen table. Leandra took out what looked like lipstick, she twisted it, and it opened to show a small screen. I hope you don't mind, but your ex-wife is really mean. She betrayed you and then had the nerve to blame you for how everything fell apart. Her husband is a small-minded man who thinks too highly of himself. He's immature and insecure. Trust me, nothing you can say would be worse than what I've already thought and said to myself for the past 18 months. I replied with a sad smile. Okay, listen closely, Leandra said as she picked up a lipstick-shaped item. I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm going to show you how you can get back at your ex-wife and her new husband. I put down my coffee cup and leaned forward. Leandra had my full attention. I told you about figuring out compatibility and changing it. This device does both. Just touching someone's skin will record and analyze their chemical makeup. Also, touching their skin while activating the device will change that chemical makeup. How does it work? I asked, getting more excited. Leandra smiled at me. Since you decided to stay here, I'll show you how to make your ex-wife fall in love with you again. I'm sure she'll leave her current husband and come back to you. I'm all in, I said eagerly. Tell me how. Leandra looked at me with a mischievous smile. First, some basics. You know, I'm 98% compatible with you, and I love you deeply. It's painful knowing I have to leave you, but I'll have our child to love. Are you sure you won't come with me? I looked into her hopeful blue eyes. I cared about Leandra, but I was still in love with Caroline. If I could have her back, that's what mattered to me. Stealing her back from Tuck was just a bonus. It was selfish, and I didn't think about the consequences. Leandra, I wish I loved you like you love me, I said. Maybe you should change my chemicals to make me love you more than Caroline, I hoped. Leandra said with a sad look in her eyes, but your compatibility with Caroline is 96%, Tuck's is almost 100%. I've never seen anything that high. My 98% with you was a shock, too. So, I need to match Tuck's compatibility. I asked, confused. No, you don't need to change yourself. Leandra said firmly, you need to change Caroline's percentage for you. I must have looked confused because Leandra laughed. Caroline's makeup favors you by 66% and Tuck by 75%. 60% is the love threshold. If you increase Caroline's compatibility with you to 89%, she'll come back to you easily. After a year and a half, my days of sadness would soon be over. The thought of having Caroline back filled me with excitement, and I think Leandra noticed and frowned. I couldn't hide my blush. I have some warnings for you, she said tightly. Okay, I'm listening, I said, barely hiding my smile. It was unfair to her, but I wasn't thinking clearly. All I wanted was Caroline back, and to beat Tuck. I understand your excitement, she said with a sigh, but there are two things you must know. First, don't go above 89%. There might be side effects, nothing terrible, but why risk it? 89% will make Tuck her second choice. I nodded and asked, what else should I know? This device will dissolve 1 week after I leave. If you don't use it by then, you'll miss your chance. Okay, so how do I use it? It's simple, Leandra held the device. See this groove? Turn it left, and the screen shows. Turn the top to the right to increase, left to decrease. We could decrease Tux's percentage, but that might make Caroline want neither of you. I get it, but how do I use it? set it at 89%, touch Caroline's skin, and push this button on the bottom. The change will take 2 or 3 weeks. Each time you're with her, she'll fall more in love with you. I took the device from Leandra and kissed her softly. She kissed me hard, and we went to the bedroom. We were together until early morning before dawn. I woke to find Leandra already dressed. She wore another jumpsuit like the one that had been destroyed. It seemed she had a spare. I dressed quickly and drove her to a remote part of the ranch. Leandra took the blue box and set it on the ground. Next, she took out what I first thought was a cell phone and started tapping on it. "Are you sure you won't come with me? I can make the PA big enough for both of us," Leandra said. "I know this isn't fair, Leandra," I said as I hugged her. "I wish I'd met you first. If I could, I'd lower your attraction to Caroline." She said sadly, "The thought of not being with Caroline scared me." "You can do that," Leandra shook her head slowly. Tears in her eyes, "Not without your permission. Making people more compatible is easy, but reducing it when it's already very high and without you agreeing, it could be dangerous. It might even kill you. I'd rather see you with Caroline than see you dead." Leandra looked at me with deep sadness. "Would you let me lessen your feelings for Caroline?" "No," I shook my head. "I think this is best." Of course, I was terribly wrong. "Will I ever see you again?" I finally asked as Leandra checked on her pod. "I'll be back in 6 months," she said softly. "If you want, I can visit you. It would be risky for you to travel while you're expecting." She chuckled, "The pregnancy for my people is 5 months, not 9, and I'll most likely come back to this world. They hope I can have another child with you, but I wouldn't do that if you were with Caroline." I kissed Leandra deeply and thanked her for giving me my life back. Her pod seemed to have no way to move, but it rose straight up and vanished in seconds. The next day, I knew there would be a meeting of the entertainment board at the club, and Caroline would probably be there. When I entered the conference room, Caroline and 7 other ladies were seated around a table. Silence filled the room. I ignored the tense feeling and went from one lady to the next, shaking hands. When I reached Caroline, I offered my right hand while I kept my left finger on the button. As soon as she grasped it, I pressed it. There was a jolt of electricity that made Caroline pull her hand away, as I had done with Leandra. "I'm sorry," I apologized, "that must have been static electricity." Despite Leandra's warning, I had raised the compatibility to 98%. I didn't want Caroline to think about Tuck at all. "What can I do for you, Richard?" she said, sounding annoyed. "We're busy here." "Well, I've come to join the entertainment committee," I said with a smile. "I don't think so, Caroline," she said bluntly. "I'm not interested in this silly attempt to get back with me. I love Tuck. Can't you get that through your thick head?" The other ladies gasped in shock at Caroline's harsh words, but Caroline didn't back down. I just chuckled. "Caroline, please let's move on from our past. I hear you are planning the 4th of July celebration, and I thought a man's view might help. Some men complain that the events are only for kids and women. I thought I could share some ideas." Barbara Harris, who sat across the table from Caroline, spoke up. "He's right, Caroline. My husband complains about the 4th of July celebration. He says there's nothing to do but eat. We've limited the alcohol and turned off the internet, so there's no TV and limited cell service. A man's view would be nice." The other women quickly agreed, and despite Caroline's annoyance, I was added to the entertainment committee. I don't know what I was expecting. Caroline was hostile during that first meeting, and whenever I saw her or her and Tuck for the next 3.5 weeks, I began to think it wasn't going to work. I was ready to give up and go back to my old life, but I had pushed my way onto the committee, and I felt I had to see it through anyway. At the next meeting, I noticed things changing between Caroline and me. Being on the committee was surprising. I had some good ideas that I knew the men would like. One was a family softball game, another was a couple's scavenger hunt with the prize being tickets to a baseball game and dinner out. Throughout the meeting, Caroline didn't look at me with anger. In fact, she smiled at me several times. At the end of the meeting, Caroline stopped me at the door and asked if I'd have lunch with her. She said she wanted to talk about the 4th of July celebration. I agreed. After that, we started having lunch once or twice a week. She always said it was to discuss the 4th of July party. Each time we met, Caroline found ways to touch me or get closer to me. It was during the 4th of July celebration at the club where things really changed. I had been busy with my duties when Caroline grabbed my arm. She asked if I'd help her get more soft drinks from the storage shed. After I followed Caroline into the shed, she locked the door behind us. Caroline moved close and kissed me like never before. I kissed her back, and we became very close at that moment. I started doing something I thought I'd never do. I began having an affair with a married woman. Caroline and I started meeting in motels far away from our town. At first, I was nervous because I knew I wasn't as well built as Tuck, but I soon realized I didn't need to worry. That first time, Caroline was very pleased. Over time, I didn't enjoy the affair as much as I thought I would. Rumors began to spread around the town, even though Caroline and I tried to keep it quiet. If anyone asked me about it, I would just roll my eyes and tell them to get serious. Everything came to a stop about 2 months into the affair. Caroline and I had just finished being close, more and more. I was starting to see that I wasn't as in love with Caroline as I once was, as Leandra had predicted. Caroline had fallen deeply in love with me. "Richard, can I ask you something?" Caroline asked while we were lying in bed. "Of course," I answered. "Richard, I made a big mistake," she said with tears in her eyes. "I shouldn't have left you. Now I see how much I love you. I miss you so much. Can I come home?" I looked into Caroline's eyes and saw she was scared I would say no. 3.5 months ago, I would have been very happy to hear this. While I still wanted her back, it wasn't as exciting as I thought it would be. "I'd love to have you back," I said, but then I added, "but you're married now. Tuck might not be okay with that." "That I've already decided to divorce him," she said plainly. That left me feeling uneasy. It was just like Caroline, it was always about what she wanted. Tuck was not a fool. The rumors about Caroline and me must have gotten to him. He hired a private investigator, and somehow they put a camera in our motel room. I don't know how they got the pictures in video because we changed motels almost every time. The confrontation between Tuck and Caroline went very badly. The next time I saw Caroline, she had a black eye. I was furious that he had hit her, despite her cheating. I never hit her. A couple of times I wanted to, but I never did. I was taught from a young age that you just don't hit a woman. David, you know what happened next. The divorce between Tuck and Caroline got very messy. Tuck fought it hard as the divorce went through the courts. Caroline moved back to the ranch. You were very unhappy with me when I let her back into the family home. I was surprised that most of my friends took Tuck's side when Caroline left me. They were all on my side, but they kept being friends with Tuck. Now that Caroline was back, they were mad at me. The thing that really annoyed me was that Tuck had been the bad guy first, and now I was the bad guy. No one seemed to blame Caroline. Having Caroline back was great for the first month, but Caroline being Caroline, she thought things would be like they were when we first got married. But I had changed. I don't even remember how the argument started, but it got worse until Caroline packed a bag and left. Strangely, I didn't care. I didn't try to call or contact her. I can't explain it, but I was just done. People say time heals a broken heart, and I guess they are right. The day after Caroline left, Tuck came to the feed store. I could tell he wanted to fight, but I didn't want any part of it. "I'm going to beat you up," he growled at me. "I don't want to fight you, Tuck." "There's no reason," I told him. "Caroline left me yesterday." His hands that had come up to hit me suddenly dropped to his side. He looked at me, trying to decide if I was telling the truth. "You just trying to get out of a beating," he said. "Look, Tuck," I said with a sigh, "you and I both know I can fight you, but what's the point? Caroline packed a bag and left last night. If you want her back, now might be the time to find her." He continued to stare at me, trying to figure out if I was lying. Finally, he left. I guess he figured if I had lied, he'd find me another day and try to beat me up then. With Caroline gone, I had time to think about what I had done, and I felt deeply ashamed. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would ever have an affair with a married woman. Even though Tuck had been mean to me, I found no joy in his pain. But the bad situation got worse. Tuck found Caroline at her parents' house and tried to convince her to come home with him. She made it clear that she loved me, not him. Caroline told him she was going to go ahead with the divorce. It was a crushing blow for Tuck. When Tuck pointed out that she had left me, Caroline told him it was just a minor disagreement, and we'd be back together soon. At this point, David, you know the rest of the story. I didn't take Caroline back, but she kept calling, emailing, and trying to meet me. All this time, Caroline kept rejecting Tuck. Finally, in total despair, Tuck took his own life. Shortly after that, because I wouldn't take her back, Caroline had a nervous breakdown. I was more depressed after what happened to Tuck and Caroline than I had been any time after Caroline left me. One person was dead, while another was in the hospital, and it was all my fault. Nobody blamed me for these tragedies. After all, Caroline and I had split for the second time, so everyone thought I had done the right thing. I know now that I should have moved on when Caroline left. 1 month after Tuck's death, I was sitting in my chair, feeling sad and drinking some scotch. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I was so happy to see Leandra standing there. I hugged her tight and kissed her deeply. We sat on the couch and talked. She was really happy to see me, then she got a worried look on her face. "Is your wife here?" she asked. "I'm not married," I said, shaking my head. Her eyes lit up, and she cuddled close to me. Then she showed me a hologram of a baby. She said it was our son. She named him Dallin after her grandfather. He looked a lot like me when I was a baby, except he had pointed ears. He was healthy and strong. Now I had a brother on another world. After some time, I told her what happened. I messed up. I didn't do what you told me. I raised the percentage to 98, even though I knew it might cause problems. I wanted Caroline all to myself. I didn't care about the effects on her. You said the side effects weren't too bad anyway. Caroline didn't get hurt, but something strange happened. As Caroline loved me more, I stopped loving her. I realized it was my pride stopping me from moving on. Leandra looked guilty. "Let me check on you," she said, taking my hand and using her device. Then she smiled wide and hugged me. "I'm sorry," she said. "Why are you sorry?" I asked. "I wasn't completely honest," she said. "At 89%, Caroline would love only you, but I changed the settings so that as her love for you increased, your love for her would decrease. You upped it to 98% yourself." I was shocked. I stared at her for a long time, trying to understand. Leandra got scared. "Are you angry with me?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm not angry. I'm just wrapping my head around all this." I finally saw Caroline for who she really was. She wasn't a very nice person, but I felt so bad for what I did to her. "Can you fix it? Maybe you can reverse the chemicals so she stops loving me," I asked. Leandra shook her head. "No, you can only change a person's chemicals once. Trying to change her again would drive her crazy." I made dinner for us before we went to bed. We spent the night together, and I felt better than I had in a month. I still felt guilty, but I knew I had to live with it. As I made breakfast, I teased Leandra, "Did I make you pregnant again?" She smiled and nodded. "It's a girl this time." I laughed. Tholian women were very fertile, Leandra told me about her last mission. Out of 24 women who came to Earth, 14 went back pregnant, and 6 took men with them. Leandra asked me again if I'd go to her world with her. This time, I said yes. So, when you read this, I have been on Thalia for 7 years. After agreeing, I worried about how I'd make a living in a new world. Leandra laughed and said people on her planet worked because they wanted to, not because they had to. As a fertile man, the government would give me anything I needed. Leandra wouldn't have to go on missions anymore either. She didn't say how many kids she wanted, but she made it clear she wouldn't share me. That was fine with me, she was enough for me. David, this is why I disappeared. I know it sounds crazy. If it didn't happen to me, I wouldn't believe it either. The Thalian have a machine that reads your mind and writes your story. It's not how I'd write it, but it tells the truth. The other envelope in the safe deposit box has my will. You'll get most of my property, including the ranch. You'll need to work with my siblings, but that won't be a problem. I also set up funds for your sister and mother. I have 2 requests. 1. Build a good relationship with your sister. She chose to go with your mother, but I think she regrets it. I cut her out of my life because I felt she betrayed me, and that was a mistake. I should have made up with her a long time ago, but my pride stopped me. 2. My second request is even harder, but from the bottom of my heart, I ask you to do this for me. Please reach out to your mother, make her part of your life. Please tell her that I truly loved her, but that I'm no longer here. I know you were very angry with her for leaving us to be with Tuck, but I ruined her life. She doesn't deserve more pain. Please let her be part of your family. I beg you to let her know her grandchildren if there are any. I've never asked you for anything, but I'm begging you to do this for me. There was a handwritten message at the bottom of the last page. David, I have to go now. Leandra has made a pod for the 2 of us, and we need to go through the dimensional hole before it closes. David, I want you to know that I have loved you since before you were born. You have only ever made me proud. I'm sorry for what I did. I wish I could change it, but I can't. You can help fix my mistakes, but whether you do or not, I will love you until I die. Please kiss your wife and any grandchildren you have for me. All my love, Daddy. I sat back in my chair and looked around the small room. Then I took out my father's last will and testament. Just like he said, I had control of almost everything. Of course, my aunts and uncles would have some say, but they had always been happy with me running the businesses, especially the ranch. Looking further, I found that my father had bought life insurance to cover any estate taxes, so everything would come through without tax issues. The 2 trusts were for $2 million each, so my ex-mother and sister would be well taken care of. About my father's requests, I would need to think about them carefully. I was sure I could do one of them. I felt there was nothing I had to forgive my father for. Still, I would talk to my wife about the other 2. But first things first, I had to get this will to the attorney's office. Epilogue. It was Christmas time, and I was standing at the exit of one of the concourses. I was wearing a silly chauffeur's hat and holding up a small sign that read, Emily Weaver and Family. Holding my arm was my mother, Caroline. It had taken me 2 months to finally make up my mind, but with Lisa's constant encouragement, I reached out to my mother and sister. When I called my mother and asked if she would like to have dinner with us, she cried for a full 5 minutes before saying yes. Dinner was actually quite pleasant. I had Lisa and the boys with me, Richard Jr., Tommy, and Billy. My mom was so nervous about meeting my family, but she made a great start with the boys by bringing a present for each. 3 of the latest video games. Lisa treated my mom like they were old friends. At dinner, I did as my father asked and told her that he truly loved her but had passed away. My mother put her head down and cried softly for a few moments. Then she looked at me and asked if my father had really said that he loved her. I said that he did. She cried some more, but I could see it brought her some peace. After that dinner, we began inviting her over to the house more and more. We even took a week-long vacation and left Mom to watch the boys. I was surprised, but she seemed to have had a great time, and the kids loved having her much more than the regular babysitter. My conversation with my sister was very tense at first. Emily was very suspicious of why I wanted to meet with her after all these years. She told me that Dad and I hated her for taking Mom's side. That explained her coldness to me over the years. I assured her that was never true and told her that Father's will had been found. This made her even more suspicious. I told her I would send her a copy and once she'd read it, she could talk to the attorneys all she wanted. After that, I'd call her again, and if she wanted, we could meet to discuss it. I didn't have to call her because she called me. She wanted to know more about the trust. I told my sister that this was something we should discuss face to face. I suggested that I fly back east, and we meet. She agreed. Emily was thrilled to see me, which made me much happier than I expected. She hugged me tightly when I arrived and clung to me as she introduced her husband, Sid, and their 3 kids, Todd, Chad, and Linda. They live in North Conway, New Hampshire, so I flew into Portland, Maine, and drove to their house. It was a 4-bedroom house with 3 bathrooms up on a hill. It was lovely. Her husband, Sid, who worked at a local bank, seemed like a nice guy. Their 3 kids, ages 10, 8, and 7, were very polite. I asked my sister if she could give lessons in manners to my kids. I thought Emily's kids would get along great with mine. My kids were close in age, 9, 8, and 7. The visit was a great success. When I explained to my sister that the trust was a generation-skipping trust, I think she was glad that I had come to explain it. She seemed confused and a bit embarrassed because they didn't have the money to hire their own attorney, so I explained it as simply as I could. She could use the income from the trust for her lifetime, and when she died, the trust would go to her kids. Emily was thrilled with that. When I was getting ready to leave, I asked my sister if she and her family had plans for the Christmas holidays. She said they were just going to stay home. On a whim, I invited them out to the ranch. At first, she said they couldn't afford it, then I told her she had the money from the trust fund. Emily looked at her husband, Sid, who nodded his head a lot. When Emily's kids heard they were going to a ranch for Christmas, they got very excited. Now I'm at the airport with my mom. If it weren't for my dad, I would never have talked to her again, and I'm waiting for my sister, who I hadn't spoken to for almost 10 years. I don't know where you are, Dad, but thank you for bringing our family back together. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.